computer. All right, so here's the funniest thing. I was researching like your intro, Nep's intro, Chani's intro. I'm like, okay, how am I going to do this intro? Here it is. How did you come up with yours?
I don't even remember the first time I did it.
Was
I
it back to
remember,
DFS?
yeah. What I used to say my Twitter handle, I think.
Okay.
I don't know why, but it was also different than what I have now. And I definitely messed up like the first 5 or 10 times on SorareData where I was like, welcome to the Roto. And I'm like, oh, God.
You definitely did that. Like I can recall that, but you also were started the server content on RotoWire.
Yes. Yeah.
And then
Which,
you were bundling everything. You guys were the bundle team, you and Andy.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's a long time ago, which in real life is probably not that long ago.
I
Um,
mean, it's what, just after COVID ended, which I don't know. Like, can you actually say that it ended?
yeah.
The answer to that is, but
I'm
like
coming up on, is it 2 or 3 years at SorareData? 3 years?
that definitely feels like if you would have told me you've been there for 7, I would have believed you.
I think it's three. What are we in? 2024,
2024.
2021? Yeah.
So
Uh,
like,
I literally go to LinkedIn to find out. That's how I like
well, do you
remember.
use LinkedIn? Is this a
Like I'm
thing?
on it, but I don't use it. Uh, I just I've had like back-to-back fake jobs. And so let me see here.
So
October
that's
2021. That's when I started SorareData. Yeah. But yeah, I've had back-to-back fake jobs. And so using LinkedIn is just weird to me because it's like all these people. I have like a lot of friends from like high school and college who, respectfully have real jobs and they're on LinkedIn and they like describe what they do. And I'm like,
yeah.
I used to have a real job and now I've had two fake ones and LinkedIn just doesn't cater to people with fake jobs.
Yeah, I was gonna say I don't know. I can't recall being LinkedIn. Like my LinkedIn experience is like my CPA will be like, "Hey, you want to be friends?" So like if you run across a lawyer, they're like, "Hey, you want to be friends?" I'm like, not really.
I get yeah. So I'm not on Facebook. And so LinkedIn kind of connects me with some people that I haven't seen in years, blah, blah. But when I say connect, I mean we literally like one of us sends like I don't even know what they call it. It's not like a friend request, but whatever it is, it's accepted and like that's it. There's no like actual communication with these people, but
They're like they can now spam you for a job offer. That's what I feel like
theoretically,
LinkedIn. I feel
theoretically.
like that's what that program is for. And I'm totally doing them a disservice. I know like you're supposed to be like posting there and there's ways to get people, but I'm like,
You're not wrong in that respect though, because I have friends who work in like HR or recruiting,
mhm,
and they're like, I can't do my job without LinkedIn. And I was
right.
like, oh, I don't even know why I'm on LinkedIn, but I guess if I ever need to look for a job, hopefully I don't.
I might still be a bank manager on LinkedIn.
Yeah,
I'm that would be interesting. But
yeah. I basically use it to remind me when I started working for SorareData.
that's fair. So I kind of was excited not only for like this whole thing to finally kick off, but for you to start because one thing I've noticed within like sober content space is we get so used to our normal people. You, Nep, Chani, Black, Sean, Quinny, Harry, all these guys. If I missed anybody that I'm going to have later on the show, apologies. But you get so much in the motion that like for all these new people to come in, they have no clue like your background, like how it all started out. So I wanted to go back to the beginning for you. Like tell us about the start because it's been I do shows with you weekly and it's been a while since I've heard the whole start for you too. It was probably like a Friday show that you said it at one point.
Yeah, I did talk about it once, and I remember I ended up going into the story basically how I ended up at SorareData, like late in a stream back when I was like adamant about streams not being more than an hour, and I kind of like had to cut off a lot of story. So I also one of the things I do when I tell this story is I include a lot of like pre content stuff because like what I used to do is very, very, very different than what I do right now. And like I kind of said before, I used to have like a real job and now I have
It
this
was
fake
Wall
job.
Street,
But
right? Wasn't it Wall
yeah,
Street?
so
Okay.
I worked in finance right out of college and I worked for a major investment bank and my job was to help rich people buy cool stuff. And
Some people would call that a fake job, by the way.
no, it was a real job. It was real money, not my money. But I worked as basically like a loan underwriter, and they
Yep.
used their stocks and bonds as collateral to
Yep.
buy boats, third houses, college educations, all the stuff.
JPEGs? JPEGs?
No J. I mean, you could legally, you could.
Maybe you just missed that window. Like maybe if
I
you were
did.
doing
Yeah,
that
we were
and
ahead of
like,
our time, I guess. So I did that for a little bit and loved the people I worked with. Like the group I was in was actually really young. I mean, I was 22, 23 at the time. And it just like I went to work, I did my work and I went home and there was I didn't really love any part of it. And then a friend of mine, I was living at home. I'm from New York City, so I actually was like one of the random people who lived in New York City but worked in New Jersey, which makes no sense. People do it the other way. But my office happened to be in New Jersey. I eventually got another job from a guy I worked with my first job. He left, and then they were hired. This other place was hiring, so they hired me. And that bank was based in Amsterdam. And so, like my first week of working of this new job, I got to go to Amsterdam for a few days, and it happened to be the week after my younger brother graduated from college. So I brought him with me as like a graduation present. I paid for his flight because I had a hotel and everything. And I don't I don't remember what happened in the 4 days I was in Amsterdam. Um, you
I
guys
think
can
a lot of
probably
people probably
figure out
figured
why
that
that
out.
was the case. Yeah. And then I spent some time in Dublin actually after that because they had kind of banking up. But anyway, so that second job was similar to my first job, but instead of helping rich people buy other things, we were helping hedge funds invest in other hedge funds. I realize there's some people who do this line of work and really love it. I just didn't. It just wasn't what I wanted to do. And so I had this conversation with my mother when I decided I was going to move out of New York to around where I live now, because my girlfriend at the time lived there. And we had been kind of doing a long distance thing for a little bit. Long distance wasn't like that long. We saw each other every weekend, but finally I was like, I knew we were going to get married at some point. I was like, I should probably live close by and see what she's like on Tuesdays,
Yeah.
in our adult life. And my mom was like, so you're going to like commute the hour and a half into New York every single day so that you can like then go live in Connecticut. And like, that's what you want to do like forever. And I was like, that sounds pretty awful. Not what she said, but like actually doing that. And
Right,
again,
right.
I know lots of people today who do it, but it just wasn't what I wanted to do. And so literally like if it was not that day, it was the next day. I got a flyer from New York University, and they had just started a new master's program in sports business. And I've loved sports my entire life. While I was working for these investment banks, I did some very, very, very light part-time work for RotoWire, which is a fantasy content site. And the only reason I got into that is because my older brother went to high school with one of the founders.
Ah, there's the connection.
Yeah, there was
Yeah.
just one random connection. And I hate having that connection because when I was so I ended up going to NYU to get my sports business master's. I was like, I'm going to do a career change. And to do that, I'm going to get my master's in sports business, which to this day, I I don't think was worth the money.
Probably not, but it was also like the mindset shift that you needed.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And so I definitely learned a ton while I was there that kind of has molded the way that I look at Sorare even. And so I went to NYU, and so I was going to NYU part time while I worked full time. And while I was there, they would bring in all of these people who worked in sports, and every class had a speaker. Oh, this person works for Major League Soccer. This one works for the New York Giants, and it was really cool. And they would all talk about like how they got to where they were. And every single story was like, I worked really hard, blah, blah, blah. But ultimately, it was always like, and my neighbor was the C, and it
Connection.
was like, it was always a connection.
Yep.
They would talk about how much they worked and how long, and they did all this stuff. And it always came back to like who they knew. And I was like, and they kind of started presenting this master's program as like, as a networking,
Yep.
a $200,000
I was
networking.
literally gonna say it overpriced.
Like,
Have you ever heard of BNI groups?
no.
It's like business networking. I they just pay a ton of money. It's just all about like networking. That's literally what that sounds like.
So this is, and the idea was you could network with your professors who bring in speakers, or
Right.
your fellow classmates, some of which already worked in sports and wanted to, move up or whatever. And there was not a single connection I made in school that allowed me to eventually get where I am today. And that's not to say I don't talk to some people, but like I made friends, but I didn't make any like business connections. And so while I was there, while I was working full time and going to school part time, the economy started to like not be flying like it was. And it wasn't like the crash, it wasn't a
Hmm.
recession yet, but it was like things were like a little questionable. And I was like, man, do I really want to like keep doing this? And we had a meeting at work, and they were like, we are offering anyone who wants it the opportunity to take a sabbatical, which I think allowed you to get 25% of your salary for however long you took it,
Oh,
and
okay.
then come back at 100%. And I was like a few classes short of finishing my master's. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to take a sabbatical. And I basically became like a full-time student for one semester that included an internship, which is weird to have like an internship while you're also fully employed, but that's another.
Yeah.
I basically was trying to help a guy write a book, one of my professors. And while I was on my sabbatical, I was like, I really don't want to go back to this job. And it became very apparent when I did go back, like within a week, I was like, I don't want to do this.
I'm
I
out.
really don't want to do this.
Yeah.
And so I had just finished my master's, and I was like, I'm going to quit my job and get a job in sports. And I can't really get a job while I'm fully employed, because
Right.
I was commuting at the time. So I would take a 6:50 a.m. train to get into the New York, and then I would get home at like just after 8 p.m. So like my whole day shot of
Right.
either
Right. Right.
working or
Right.
commuting.
Ugh.
So I quit my job, and I was like, I'm going to get a job at ESPN, because ESPN is headquartered near me, near enough. And I was like, that's what I'm going to do. And while I made this decision, um, my wife and I were expecting our first child. So I interviewed at ESPN, and they basically ended up getting into like a hiring freeze, but there were like a few jobs that they had open. And every job that they basically were offering were very entry level jobs. And I had been working like in finance for 8 years or so. Like, I hate to put it this way, I was used to having like a higher income at
Right.
the time, and decided to take a risk, which left me with zero income, and a baby on the way. My wife was a teacher at the time. And so our life just kind of like totally flipped. Like, we had bought a house recently, and then I decided to quit my job. And then the economy tanked, and I didn't get a job. And I was doing some part-time work for RotoWire, and I contacted them, and I was like, if you guys have any other work, like I'd be happy to do it, because I'm not working right now.
Right. Right.
And then I became a stay-at-home dad, because I was an unemployed dad with a baby. Like, and so my wife like did her maternity leave. Like, I can remember to this day, like holding my son at the front door as she like drove off to work. And I was just
Uh-oh.
like, am I like, what happened? Like, what happened to my life here that because there was just
Well,
it was
you're sitting with a master's degree, by the way, and watching
with
your
a
mom.
master's degree. Yeah.
What are you
And
talking-
student loans from that master's degree. And I was just like, wow, I don't,
That's
like, what am I going to do? And so, like I said, I went to my boss at the time at RotoWire and I was like, if you guys have any extra work, like I would really appreciate it. And they said, we just got a deal with ESPN to, ESPN was one of their clients, to provide player notes for the Premier League for this new fantasy soccer game they have. Do you want to like look over that? And I was like, yeah, I would love to. And I remember hanging up the phone and Googling English Premier League because I had no idea what it was. I knew nothing about football,
awesome.
like nothing. And I, over time, kind of realized that the way that you could cover really any football league, but the Premier League at the time was very similar to the NFL in that there's like weekly news and there are recaps. And I kind of started doing more and more and getting some more work here and there from them. And I was like, hey, I think we have an opportunity to really build up, they call it soccer, the soccer stuff at RotoWire.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that RotoWire works, which is, I think, the smartest way running a business like they run, but they really don't take any financial risks. And so what they do is like they'll win a deal, know that they have the money, and then they'll pay everybody to do it. And
Makes
so
sense. Yeah.
I was like, hey, how about we like blow out the soccer coverage and we'll get some clients? And they were like, we'll wait for the soccer clients to come to us
Right.
and then we'll do it. And I was like,
Right.
all right, strike one on trying to like get more work from them. But they ended up putting me on this other project that was essentially we like outsource non-fantasy news. We would write these like player
Okay.
notes for this. It was called sports data, sports. I don't even remember at this point. It's very similar.
I was going to say
Yeah,
that's eerily similar.
very similar. And so the idea was that we would write these player notes that I'm pretty sure it's sports data. Sport data. I don't know. Sport Radar eventually bought them, if I remember
Okay.
correctly. But anyway, so the idea is they would sell stats and then corresponding news, and the corresponding news came from us. And so the problem is that they wanted like hundreds of pieces of news every single day, all the time.
Right.
And so we had a few people that we would pay to write them, and then me and another guy would edit them and like basically publish them. And the difficulty, I remember having I called my boss at the time before I got on this project, and I was like, I'm looking for any work, and he's like, we could really help on this other, we could really use help on this other project. It was New Year's Eve, and he was like, Jason is the guy that was working on it at the time, is the only one who does it. He needs like some breaks. Can you help out? And I was like, yeah, sure. Like I was desperate for work.
Right. Right.
I think I was making $9 an hour
For them
for them at the time. And I think that they like increased it to 12. And I was like, I made it.
because of your master's degree. They're like,
Yeah.
you're well educated.
Clearly.
We got
So
$12.
well educated, I was willing to work for $12 an hour.
But
So
meanwhile, you're able to do all this from home though, too. So like
yes.
you're
Yeah.
saving, you tell your wife like, hey, master's degree, taking care of kids, that's like $20. I'm really making 32.
Yeah, exactly. And childcare is expensive. So if we were
For
going to,
sure. For sure.
but the, the, so I talked to, excuse me, Jason on New Year's Eve, and he was like, any help you can give, I'd be appreciative. I was like, okay, I can do like 8 hours a day. Like if they're going to pay me hourly, I have the time. Like
Yeah.
my son
Okay.
was just born basically. And so, um, those of you who have kids, they, and the first child is different than like any subsequent ones, but
For sure.
like when you look back, they don't really do much
Nope.
early on. Like you have tons of time and everything
Basically.
is online. And so it's like, even if I'm playing with him, I can have my laptop here and it's like,
Yep.
yeah, not peak dad, fatherhood, but like it's there.
Dude, you're in survival mode. It's
Right. Totally. So so he was like, oh, I thought you were going to offer like 2 hours a week. And I was literally like offering up 40. And he was like, okay. So he and I like took this project over. And at some point in the next few months, uh, one of my boss at RotoWire came to me and he was like, "You're working too much
Right. We're not
for
making
a
enough
part to
from
be a
this
part-time
probably.
employee." Right.
Oh, okay.
So like I was billing them way more than 40 hours, which they were okay with at the beginning, but at some point it's like you can't have somebody working part-time that's like
Right.
50 hours
Right.
a week.
Right.
Now, I forgot about this other part of this news editing thing. Sports happen 365 days a year. So we had to like keep this going all the time.
Hmm.
So I specifically remember like Christmas morning, my kids like opening their presents, and then I had to like leave for an hour,
Right.
bang out some of these notes or whatever. I had Thanksgiving, New Year's, like major holidays, like I just worked. And it was a gigantic, like it was such a pain in the ass. Like
Yeah.
nobody wants to. On the flip side, or excuse me, on the other side, I did convince them to do more like football stuff. And so one of the things we used to do was confirmed lineups
Mm-hmm.
when they were announced, which like at the back then was not easily
A
found.
lot harder than
Yeah,
what we have now.
right. And so on RotoWire, like we had one page of like all the Premier League games and like the confirmed lineups. But that also required somebody to do them at, for my time, 6:30 a.m. on Saturday, 9 a.m. Saturday, 11:30
Mm-hmm.
Saturday, 7:30 Sunday. Like
Yeah.
that's all the time. I was the only one
Yeah. It's
doing it.
early.
And so I was basically just working all the time, which I had a job, so I was like happy about. And then eventually, like I said, they were like, "You're working too much. We have to make you a full-time employee." And RotoWire is based in Madison, Wisconsin, which,
Get done with that.
yeah, so they have an office there, but they have like dozens, maybe even hundreds of like contributors from everywhere else. But like all but three full-time employees were in Madison.
Okay.
And they were like, "We'd love to hire you full-time." And I was like, "Great." And they were like, "We'd like you to move to Madison." And I was like, "No chance." There is a Madison 30 minutes from my house now, not Madison, Wisconsin. And I was like, "My wife wouldn't even move there. I'm not moving to Wisconsin." So they were like, "All right, like we may have to like cut your hours then." And it was like, "Well, that sucks." They came back with the total opposite. They were like, "Just work remotely."
Right. Like you've been doing for the 50 hours a week.
Exactly. Exactly. I think part of it is that, and I hate to say that, I feel like I proved myself that like I can do a
Right.
full-time job remotely, but I think that's what it was. They were comfortable enough with how much I was doing remotely that it didn't, who cares that I was going to be in an office. And we used, what was there before Slack? There was like another Slack.
Yeah. I'm trying to think. Almost something like MSN Messenger. Remember those days, but
Well, we
probably was
used to
something else.
communicate on AOL Instant
There
Messenger,
you go. Okay.
but like, no, there was another one
I can't think of it.
that's going to drive me nuts. I'll think of it at some point.
Yeah.
There was a precursor to Slack. So we had that. And it was like, I was talking to people in Madison all day. So like me being there, it didn't matter.
Right.
And so we kind of made this deal that I would go out there a few times a year just to like see everything. And I went once and never again. But yeah, so I worked full time for a while, and then I was doing mostly football. The sports data deal, I think, left or expired, and we didn't renew it. So then it was like, "Oh, you're the soccer guy now."
Right.
And I did a bunch of other sports over the years for them as well. I did American football, I did college basketball, I did some hockey, baseball. Yeah, like again, like I was desperate for work. I just did whatever I could do. So eventually, fantasy soccer starts to becoming a thing in the US. And we end up having like all of these daily fantasy sites kind of popped up out of nowhere. Fantasy Goal and
Yeah.
um,
I'm trying to think of the one before DraftKings that a lot of those guys came from. I'm blanking on Draft
Draft
Street.
Street,
Draft
Star
Street.
Street, one of
There it
them,
is. I
both
think it was
both
Draft
started the
Street.
same
Maybe
day.
both. Yeah.
And they all had like different, some of them had like soccer offerings, and they were like, "Hey, you do this for ESPN and Yahoo, can you do player notes for us?" And I was like, "Of course." And so all of a sudden they were like, "Wow, it's a good thing we like built up this soccer thing over the years because we can like actually sell it." So we end up doing getting a deal with DraftKings and FanDuel. So I did a ton of DraftKings and FanDuel content. Um, I did a weekly like preview show for the weekend Premier League slate. Like you did it as well.
Yep.
Um, and that's just kind of what I did. I just became like the soccer guy. I was RotoWire Andrew, I was head of the soccer content there. And one day, so we had an Opta contract, which is insanely expensive, particularly for a site like RotoWire. And the somebody contacted me one day. I wish I could go back and find the message, but they were like, "Hey, could you add a few stats to what you guys show online?" And I was like, "Sure. Like, what do you need?" And he was like, "Last man tackles, clearances
Oh,
off the line." And I'm like, "The
interesting.
hell do you need this for?" He was like, "Oh, I play this game called Sorare." And I was like, "Never heard of it." But he's like, "Yeah, it's his fantasy game. Like, you should look into it." And I was like, "All right." So I look it up. All I see is that it's a fantasy game, fantasy football game. And I'm like, I call our like sales guy and I'm like, "Hey, here's a new site. Go sell them player notes." And and that happened a
Yeah.
lot. Like new sites come up
Right.
and it's just like, "Oh yeah, we should sell them." So I mean, the whole business of RotoWire, not the whole business, big part of it are these player notes that you write once
Right.
and you sell
You
to
sell it
all of these
everywhere.
different people. Yeah. So this was just like another one. And I remember they contacted back and they were like, "We're interested. We would love to talk to you, like whoever heads up your soccer content, to like tell them about the site." And I remember our sales guy was like, "Yeah, they want to talk to you." And I was like, "Ugh, like, what are they going to tell me?" And I think the idea was that they would advertise on RotoWire to try to get new clients, and
Right.
then slowly we would sell them. And so I had a Zoom call with Brian O'Hagan, who was the head of growth, who actually just left Sorare.
Yeah.
Um, but I talked to Brian, and he explained the whole thing to me, including he was like, you buy these cards and you play these things, and they're NFTs and it's crypto. And I was sitting there like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Like, I don't know why anyone would do this. I wasn't into crypto at all. And NFTs, the idea of NFTs was like beyond absurd to me. I was just
Yep.
like, such an example of there's too much money in this world and the wrong people have it. And so they're spending it on these pictures.
You're like, I already did this job. It's just all these rich people.
Yeah, that's all it is. And the so during that conversation, I think I mentioned something like, "Well, how do you know how much the cards cost?" And he was like, "Oh, you use this site called SorareData." And I
Oh,
was
so it
like,
literally did come up during that meeting. I don't think you've ever told that part.
"Yeah." And so
Interesting.
I remember going to SorareData and being like, I just sitting there looking at some of the prices, and this is before like Gary V. So like
Right.
they weren't that expensive, but I think I know the first card I bought was a Keaton Parks Rare,
Yeah.
and I bought it for like $20, and I was like, I cannot believe I just spent $20 on this.
Yep. Yep.
And then I saw like the prices of uniques, and I was like, this is insane, like absolutely insane. And a few, and so Sorare sponsored our weekly podcast. So we would
Yep.
like talk all about DraftKings, but it was like sponsored by Sorare. Sorare's an NFT, and it was just like,
Didn't, correct me if I'm wrong.
I know where
Didn't
you're going.
Jordan like
Oh,
flat out like call you an idiot a couple of times for it? Like you would like do your
probably,
read. Yeah.
probably. So I didn't play So Rare, and so it came out in the read where I was
Right.
just like I literally was reading it. So Rare, I could probably find actually exactly what I wrote, what we had to say, but the audience was right. Like the DFS focused
For
people
sure.
ended up being some people who went to play So Rare, but so at some point, I don't know how it got to him, but Andy Black DM'd me on Twitter and was like, "Hey, I heard you talking about So Rare. If you have any questions or need any help, just like I'd love to help." And it actually, he didn't tell me his name. Did I say he said his name?
I think you said it, but yeah.
So anyway, so he bought a subscription to RotoWire for our Opta stats, only to find out we didn't have Jupiler League stats, which was one of the only leagues on Sorare at the time. But he still kind of like kept in touch, and he was like, if you ever need somebody to talk about Sorare on your show, I would be happy to come on. And I think I was just like, sure. But like thinking to myself, nobody cares this stupid game. Like nobody cares. So I don't know what eventually made me buy this Keaton Parks card or buy a couple others to play. But I think finally I was just like, let me try it out. And maybe I tweeted about it separately and Andy reached back out to me and he was like, hey, if you ever want to. And I was like, you know what? Maybe this Sorare thing turns into like a real client. So like, yes, come on the show. I'll like on the RotoWire show and we'll talk about what Sorare is. And I don't think it was a live stream because I didn't live stream back then. It took me a long time to like live stream because I was like absurdly nervous about it. Like really, really nervous about
Mm-hmm.
live stream. And so anyway, so he came on and I remember as soon like I was about to hit record and he was like, by the way, my name's Andrew also. And I was like, I had known him
That's
as Black
awesome.
and that's it. And he was like, yeah,
Right.
my name's Andrew also. He's like, I go by Andy. And I was like, huh, how about that? And I think I'm assuming that first show was actually really bad, but we had fun and we were talking about Sorare and I was like, hey, if you like want to do this regularly, like maybe we should do it. And he was like, sure, why not? And I think he was in this mind of the more people who know about Sorare, the better.
Right. Right.
And so he was kind of playing this ambassador role, even though all he did was like play on Sorare. And so we started doing regular content. Eventually, he invited me into a Discord that included Maxime Hagenberger, who is the founder of SorareData. And I remember there was a channel in this Discord for SorareData feedback, and I had mentioned something to Andy that I found on the site that I don't remember if it was a bug or whatever it was, or it'd be cool to see this. And he was like, yeah, just like leave it in there and Maxime will do it. And I'm like, I'm not just gonna like ask Maxime to do something. Like, and he was like, just write it in there. And so I just put something in and he was like, yeah, that's a cool idea. And like 8 minutes later, it was on the site. And I was just like, whoa, that's cool. And we just kind of became friendly through Discord. And he came on the show once with Andy.
Yep. I remember that.
And yeah, it was just like, I mean, anybody who plays So Rare and is into a Discord chat, like, you know, that you become familiar with these people. I mean, Keith and I have met in person, but we mostly have
One
always
time.
communicated
One
in
time.
Discord. One time. Um, but like, and so that's just kind of how it happens. And I remember I was in Las Vegas in July, it must have been July 2021, for a RotoWire trip. Every year they did a trip out there to get everybody who works for RotoWire together, like not even just like the full-time employees, but anyone who contributes. And I was talking to my friend Jason, who was on this old sports data project. And we were talking about, I probably shouldn't say this out loud because he still works there. But we were saying how we were completely unqualified to do any other job than what we were doing. And we were like, it's an incredible position that RotoWire is in because like we need this job because if we have to find another job, like we can't
Yeah.
do anything else.
The world's passed you by.
Right, right. Again, I'm still paying like tens of thousands of dollars in student loans for this
Exactly.
master's that I thought would get me a new job. But it literally, like I remember we were on like one of those walkways like over the street. I was having this conversation and I got a Discord notification from Maxime or a message that said like I'm I'm turning SorareData into like into a real business. It was just like a side project for him. Um, and I'd like you to be the head of content. And I was like, I saw this message and I was like, holy shit, I think there might be two jobs I'm qualified to do in this world. And I have one, and this other one came out. And it at the time, the idea of taking that job was crazy.
Right.
And I had
People don't
finally
remember
like
what the site
settled.
looked like. People don't remember what the site looked like at that time. Like not only like Silver Data, but So Rare too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so like I don't know how many conversations that I had like with my wife about Sorare as a client. Like we talk about work, but like I don't think she had realized like how much I had gotten into Sorare, and particularly like just the people that we talked to, like Andy and you, and although you came along later.
Yeah, yeah.
Um and like Sean was like one of the early ones, PSU fans too. Like Sean's one, I referred Sean to Sorare. Um and fun fact, back then when you referred somebody and they made 5 purchases, you got a rare card, and he got a Jeremy Doku and I got a Karim Demirbe.
I forgot. So is that where the Doku like?
Yeah.
Is that where it came
Oh
from?
no,
That's
I'm
why it's
sorry.
always
I'm
back.
sorry. He did
Oh,
not get Doku.
Turkey?
He got Cherky.
Turkey. Yeah,
Cherky.
yeah,
My fault.
yeah.
My fault. That one still hasn't paid off yet.
Neither one really
Anyway,
have.
right. So I'm in Vegas and I kind of get this job offer, kind of. And so I go home and I tell my wife, and she's like, "So who is this guy?" And I was like, "So he runs this third party site. He's raising money to like make it a real business. And he wants me to be one of the employees." And she's like, "Have you ever met him?" And I was like, "No, no, no." And she's like, "Where does is he here? Like in the States?" And I was like, "He's in Paris." And she was like, "And how old is he?" And I lied to her and I said he was 31.
You had no idea.
He was 26.
But did you know he was
Yes.
26?
Yes. I lied to my wife about
Good
how old.
foundation for the new job. But
Yeah. But like I knew that if I told her maybe he was 27. If I told her how young he was, she'd be like,
no chance.
"You can't do this." Like that it's weight. And I don't know why 4 or 5 years makes a big of a
It
difference.
does sound a lot different. 26 to
Yeah.
31 sounds very different.
I will say that Maxime is wiser than his years,
I would agree with
but
that.
in reality, I think he's a genius. And the more I talked to him, the more I realized honestly that he's brilliant.
Right.
And I had a lot of fun talking to him about Sorare, but like way more. You know how like Sorare
Hmm.
can just there's way more to Sorare than just Sorare. And so I really enjoyed like just talking to him about stuff. And the opportunity to work for him was really cool to me.
Well, and to be really early, like really early.
He was.
Well, you were too in
I was.
terms
I was
of
employee
like the
number one.
site. Yeah, in
Yeah.
terms of the
I was the
site.
first like hired employee.
Yeah,
Um, sorry, I'm just telling my kids that I'm podcasting.
you are good. You're good.
Sorry.
But I like, I think that's something there, like for me too. Like if you get that opportunity to be like, oh, like I can actually like be part of the creation of something that's pretty cool. Whereas RotoWire, you kind of were, but you were big, a much bigger cog.
Yeah. So the other big thing that was really attractive to me of working with SorareData was how both how passionate Maxime was about SorareData, but also how quickly he could do things. And that's not a knock on RotoWire. It's just kind of the reality of
Hmm.
when you have one person who can do everything and they just do it. And I had some issues with RotoWire, just kind of like taking longer than I thought they should. But like
Sure.
football was not, or soccer was not like a
Mm.
revenue driver for them. So it was
Right.
like, hey, could you do this really cool soccer thing, or should you do these 5 things for the NFL? And they were like,
Or Major League Baseball or NBA,
or
because
yeah,
they're
like it
always
just
going to
wasn't
take
even
precedent. Yeah.
so it just wasn't even a conversation. Whereas in Solar Data, it was like not only are we having this conversation, like we're building it together. And so one of our designers, Aurelian, who still
Hmm.
works for Solar Data, he I believe was the first like paid contributors. Like he was like a part timer doing design. I believe I was the first full-time employee, but like he basically worked for Solar Data before me. But for a while, it was the three of us. And
Awesome.
it was very different than anything I had ever done. And what's funny is that the way that my job has kind of evolved over the years, I think like what I was hired to do is way different than what I do now. And I think part of it is just the way that content is consumed by people that even 3 years ago, um, like I have like drafts of like literally like a book of how to use Sorare data. And I was like, nobody's going to read this.
Nope. It'd be
Nobody
video
wants to.
though.
And so there was like a big shift of like a lot of our content had to be like um, how to use SorareData versus here's how to use SorareData.
Right.
And so just video became much more important to us than any written content. We used to do a weekly newsletter, and it would take me hours to write. And granted, I wrote a ton for RotoWire, like a ton. And as soon as you stop writing regularly, it just
Done.
becomes such a drag.
Yep.
And so we wrote this newsletter that would take me like hours to write, and like 58 people would read it. And I was like,
Nope.
this
Juice isn't worth the squeeze on
can't
that.
be, yeah, totally not. And so we just moved more to video. Eventually, I started doing live streams. So the first live stream I ever did was when we introduced the mobile app,
Oh, okay.
and it was an immediate failure because I set up Streamlabs. I did all the things I could like on my side, and Maxime's microphone like wasn't coming through. It was clearly something on my like I had to do something, but like I had no idea what to do. If you I actually please don't go back. But like if you go back, like I'm literally like sweating because I don't know what to do.
Yeah, it's the pure
Because it's like
panic, but you know that you're live too, and you're like,
so I'm panicking, I'm live, and I don't know how to fix the problem.
right.
And so it's like we went like a few minutes in the live chat's like, we can't hear you. And I'm like, I know, I'm trying, but like I really didn't know how to fix it. So I had actually set us up with a subscription from it was called Melon at the time, but is now
Yep.
owned by Streamlabs coincidentally. And I was able to like move it over there, and we figured it out. But I was like, I'm never doing a live stream again.
Well, Anna was with your boss.
Exactly,
On top of that,
exactly.
like for the pure pressure part,
Yeah,
he's like, "Oh, I'm paying you to do
to do
this."
this. Yeah, like exactly. So it was just kind of a mess early on. Um, and so then a lot of my time was spent on like the how to use Sorare data. And the problem that I had with Maxime, in all honesty, is that it felt like every time I did a video of how to use something, he would update it,
Yeah, it gets
which
archaic
theoretically
really
keeps
quick.
me employed enough because it's like, oh yeah, and time for another video. But just as we learned how people use the site and how people kind of consume our content, that kind of content didn't really work as much. And then, how much do we want to use Twitter to get our message out?
Yeah.
Because not everybody's on Twitter, and there's just it's evolved significantly. But the that's like the 45-minute story of how I
No,
got
it's
here.
awesome.
Um,
And
like
by
I
the way, I should say this too, which like I've been sitting back and just enjoying the hell of this. You actually like did like your idea for the pod right here, which I kind of love. Like you've always told me that if you could just like freelance, you would do how people got to where they were or different jobs.
yeah.
I personally think it's fascinating too. So I just completely ripped that off from you.
No, I do like telling that story.
It's such an
Because
evolution though. It really
yeah,
is.
and I feel bad because at some point it comes off like I just worked my ass off at one point and it paid off, but I do feel like that's something that a lot of people just kind of skip over in life,
Yeah.
that there are instances where just you can just work really hard and it'll work out.
You just
And
pound through it.
yeah,
Literally, you just have to pound through the resistance.
right.
So here's one other thing I'm curious of that I had written down. Have you obviously this trip down memory road probably made you do it, but have you ever like thought about the evolution of like your own content? Like how it changed from we joked with the bundles, right? To like I'm trying to remember what Sean's bundle is called with like Chicago Fire. Like that one distinctly sticks out in my head. It
Mhm.
was like the first time I actually ever heard Sean talk. And it was like such a I don't want to say revolutionary because that's not like that's probably doing too much, but
Yeah.
nobody was like, "Oh, shit stacks. That makes sense." And now everybody seems to love to do that. Maybe too much. But went from these bundles where you just talked about this random idea to now what it is, which is a daily show that has hundreds of lives. It's pretty crazy. Think about it. Like have you ever like just sat down and just thought about like the evolution of the content?
I tend not to, only because I just have to keep doing it. Like
Right.
I don't really do that. I I do like watch back shows sometimes. I don't do it as much. Um, but I think where we are now is I think we're still moving in the right direction. I think SorareData's role in the Sorare community is a little different than it was when I started at Sorare. And obviously,
Agree.
SorareData was free at the time. It was free at the time with the expectation to eventually have memberships. Like one of the things that one of the cool things about Sorare is that it presented an opportunity for third-party sites to exist and businesses to exist based on their platform. And so SorareData was kind of the first site that tried to do it and say like, yes, this is a big enough platform that third-party sites can exist on it. And for those like in the States, mostly like the DFS platforms uh, are big enough where there are like DFS content sites that are full-fledged businesses that do a lot of, they all do the same thing, but they do it differently. But they're big enough that they can withstand it. And I think I think it's kind of overlooked because everybody who plays Sorare seriously like knows Sorare data. But I think it was kind of a measuring stick of Sorare of
Yep.
how successful is Sorare that there are people who want to dedicate business, their time and their businesses to kind of supporting this platform or supporting the users. And so we still have people that kind of are upset that we have like a membership model. But I think it kind of overlooks the fact that the site today, like literally could not exist without them. Like
Right.
there's not enough time in the day for and enough people willing to work for free on a side project to create what the site is. And I'm not saying that everything on the site is perfect, but it's way better than it was when it was free. And there's still a ton of stuff that's free on the site anyway. But it was just kind of the development of SorareData itself is pretty remarkable over the 3 years, and so my content's just a small part of it.
Yeah. I was just thinking as you were talking too, like when I first got into Sorare, all I used Sorare data for, literally all I used it for was price valuations.
Yep.
Like, because this is back to the time when Sorare didn't post it anywhere either. So like you have to like look through a player page to see. I don't even know if they had were player pages. Actually, now that I think about it, it was really hard. You had to use Sorare data, and then I had never used lineup builder probably for a year and a half because I had like one lineup.
Yeah.
I was a flipper. And then you go, okay, now we're at a point where I think a lot of people server data memberships is for the lineup builder. I think a lot of people just you use the player pages, but if you go like what's the one part of the site I could not live without? Like if you told me I could keep one part of the site, it's lineup builder. I could do without the rest. It's just kind of crazy to think about that.
It's by far like our most powerful tool.
For sure, but that
Um,
wasn't the it's crazy to think about. That wasn't the idea of the site.
Definitely not. Nope.
Like it was data.
Yeah. It yeah, I remember um when Maxime was like working on the lineup builder and he was like, what should be in the lineup builder? Like what do you look for?
Right.
And like just the idea of like sportsbook odds. It was like, and he was like, why would you want that? And I was like, because I have cards in Korea and Japan, and I don't follow those leagues,
I
so I don't
don't
know
know
which ones are
jack.
good. Right. And just using like where they are in the table is not good enough for me.
Right.
And it was like, okay, yeah, let's put those in. And like now those are like vital parts of the
Yeah.
lineup builder. And I'm not saying that like sportsbook odds are perfect, but it gives you an idea of like if it's a good matchup or not.
You know what's I'm gonna take us off topic a little bit on this because this is
How
what
dare you?
this that well, I mean, that's kind of what this whole thing that I'm trying to create here is gonna be about. But you know what I've always thought is really interesting on sportsbook odds? People see I'm gonna go for this. I don't know if this is gonna come out right, but just bear with me. People see minus 400 or minus 500 or over their 5 to 1 odds or whatever. And they, oh, okay, that means that that team's going to smash. You're going to score a ton of goals. Doesn't. It literally means that the bookies are this confident that the team's going to win,
Yep.
that that's what they're going to put on. So, like, I used to run kind of what you're talking about, like a third party DFS site. People are like, oh, okay, so like how many goals is Manchester United going to score? I'm like, probably none because they suck. But like maybe one, maybe two. Well, they're minus 600. I'm like, that doesn't mean what
Yeah.
they're going to win. Go look at the team totals for that, and you can get that. But I always thought it was really interesting. Like you would see, for me, I see the odds, and I go, that's like how dominant the team may
Yep.
be, whether it's in possession or not giving up opportunities. Whereas other people, and this is where you start realizing like people just see things differently, go, oh, that means they're going to win minus 500, so they're going to win 5-0. Not
It's really that
particularly.
easy. Yeah.
But it's just interesting how people interact with stuff. And I think that's one of the interesting things too, like where we're seeing people like pick score. I can remember pick score not existing. And people are like, hey, he should have been triple A. It's like, well, A means that we think he's going to do pretty well too.
The more stuff we add to the site, the more I appreciate how many people look at data and come up with conclusions that are completely different than what the data is actually telling them.
Right. Or what you guys expected the data to tell them, maybe. Would that be fair to say? Or
Uh, no, it's more, mine is more the just a slight misunderstanding of what it is. And um I experienced this a lot in like even in DFS days that like people really don't understand what projections are.
yep.
And so on two levels, like they think that they are basically like this is how many points a player is going to score in this game. And then when they don't score that, they're like, hey, your projection said that.
Yeah. What
And
the
then you're like, well, it's really like a median projection. And they're like, whoa, whoa, whoa.
hell? Don't
What?
don't bring that out.
Yeah. And so I do think that like one of the reasons we don't do them on Sorare, like we've talked about it because not to give too much away, but like
There's a number behind
there is
the
a number
layers.
behind
Yeah.
every pick score.
Yeah.
And if you see like five people who are triple A's, they're listed in their number order.
Right.
But
Right.
we don't show the number because we actually think it would be more confusing because it's not really like a projected score.
Well, and soccer projections are so wildly like and Sorare even makes it worse because of the whole decisive
Right.
action
Right.
bonus.
Yeah. So like decisives are easy to project until they're not. Like
Mhm.
goals are easy.
Clearance off the line isn't that easy to project, you're telling me?
Yeah. Well, not even those, just like, hey, Harry Kane has a 55% chance to
Right.
score this week. And then he doesn't. Everyone's like, your projection was wrong. And it's like, that's not what a projection is. And so honestly, like the pick scores are I think pick scores are also significantly misunderstood, which falls on me as well, because part of my job is to like explain our tools and how they work. But like pick scores are essentially um, letter grades for historical data.
Yep.
It's not what we think is going to happen, but it's based off of your players' scores over the last 15 games or 5 games, the opponent that they're playing, how big, if you're an overwhelming favorite or an underdog, how that team has done at home versus away, what other players in their position have scored against them, which I was talking to somebody earlier today that they just ignore that, which to be honest, I do too. But people feel like it's helpful, but it's like, hey, we found all of this data about everything that's going on in for either your player or some other player or the whole team and what they've done home and all of this stuff. And like all of these things are better than all of that guy's things.
Right.
So that means you're a triple A and you're a double A.
Well,
And people are like, no, you're wrong.
I mean,
It's like,
I remember lineup builder literally being you just sorted by L15 or L5. There was no pick score. And you just like, okay, good matchup, good matchup. Okay. It's crazy to think how far that one tool alone has come.
yeah,
Um,
and you're a pro pick score person. Like you get it. You
mhm.
understand pick scores. There are, excuse me, a lot of people who are like, I hate pick scores and yet don't ignore them also.
So when it first came out, by the way, and I'm actually very
They were
comfortable.
very wonky when they first came out. I will
He's
admit.
gonna be on this eventually, so I feel comfortable calling it out. I distinctively remember our buddy Haber going like one week. I don't remember exactly what the tweet was. It was something along the lines, "I'm never looking at pick scores again." In DFS we call IKB, I know better. And it was like, I know better. And then it was like the following week, and he's like, man, I got like 9 AAA pick scores in my gallery this week. Let's go.
It and that's sort of what I need to do a better job myself in terms of like content for SorareData, that like pick scores can't be wrong. Like they're an indicator of what has
Right.
happened
Right.
in the past. There's there is no one going in being like, "Oh, I like his matchup." Like there's zero opinion. Now, you could make the argument that what we include in the pick score is up to us, but
Sure.
again, we're very open about what is in the pick, what is calculated. And so that's the I can understand when people look at a pick score that's good or bad and they disagree with it. And that's okay. Like
It's
that's
just
the
like
IP.
another tool in your arsenal to go, here's what, and it's just like, on like the DFS professional side, a lot of those guys that aren't doing the content themselves, but like that are just consuming it, they will go, here's what RotoWire's projection is. Here's what established the runs projection is. Here's what another site is. Because there's little tweaks in the models that the people are doing that go, one might overweight the home matchup. That might be my model, but
Mhm.
somebody else's. I think that that's just like really kind of important to note. So just because you don't necessarily think that the pick score is right doesn't mean that the data wasn't done. It's just the
Right.
interpretation, like you said.
Yep. Now, the the big the big part of the pick scores that people don't like are the lineup projections. And I'm not going to get into that
No.
now, but I will say, like this past weekend, Augustin Palavecino for Necaxa was like 50%, 54%, I think, on SorareData. And I was like, I'm making my lineups. And I was like, there's no reason he shouldn't start. I'm
Right.
playing him in my top lineup. And he played and he scored 100. And everyone's like, good thing you didn't listen to the lineup projection. And it's like, this is just like, it's a projection.
Yeah.
I thought it was wrong. Like, it's okay to not like just blindly follow everything. And pick scores are kind of the same way. If you look at something and you're like, I think this pick score is wrong, and it's like, then play the player. Like, we're not stopping you.
Yeah. And I think too that's something I feel like we both got like on soapboxes about this, but it's also something too, like if especially something like Liga MX, there's not a lot of people out there plugging in lineup predictions either. Like that's not, or they're just following the trend. There's not a lot of people that are intently following that league. So if you are, there's an advantage. And so I think sometimes we overdo that. All right, I take an hour. I have one final burning question. Have you always been called Laird? Or did we just all of a sudden just do that and you were just too nice to correct us? And you're like, okay, I'll go by my last name.
I go by my last name more than I go by my first name.
When did that start? Do you
Uh,
know?
College, like, no, high school. I don't know. That's it.
So it was a thing because I literally was like preparing for you to come on. I wanted to have a couple points, and I was like, I literally have never called you Andrew
No,
one time, not one time. And it's never even been an inclination. My wife knows you as Laird. Like I don't even think she knows you for. So I was just like, did we do this to you, or did you?
no. I've been comfortable being Laird for years. I For a very brief time of my childhood, I was Andy,
Okay,
and it drove my parents crazy. Like one day, I was like, I want to be called Andy, and had no like I don't remember why, but it drove them nuts. And they were like, "We named you Andrew. Your name is Andrew." And I was like, "Yeah, I'd prefer just people call me Andy." And I actually, in seventh grade, I changed schools, and I remember I was like, I showed up and I was like, "I'm Andrew," and I was Andrew since then. But like, there was another Andrew in the class,
okay.
and he'd already been in the school, and so I became Laird to a lot of people just because it was different. And yeah, I think it's short enough that like It's easy to use. But I would say from people I talk to in Sorare that I don't I don't know anybody who calls me Andrew, actually, now that you
Nope,
are pointing this out.
nope. So something nugget to leave with. Well,
Huh.
Andrew Laird, thank you for the time. Appreciate you having on.
Uh, yeah, no, thanks for having me on. I'm really excited for all of the other episodes because, like,
We've got about 12 people so far. I told you my commitment on this was 24. And then we'll see where it's at. If people like it, we'll keep going. All right.
well, I mean, based on the button, we know what your commitment level can be.
It's about 24. Well, thank you, man. Appreciate your time.
Anytime.